Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of book reading and book discussion. So, we are reading this book, Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and it has been a very interesting read. The book talks about mindset that we carry with respect to earning money, spending money, investing money, and how is this different from people who are rich and wealthy. Mr. Morgan has broken lot of myths as we were reading each chapter, and there were a lot of thought-provoking points being raised by him, and this has been very interesting read. So, if you're joining us today for the first time, I would really urge you to go back and see previous 11 episodes where we've covered first 11 chapters. And each chapter has brought in lot of insight for me and for each individual who is viewed and studied this chapter along with me. So today we are on chapter 12, and the name of that chapter is Surprise. So let me bring it on screen. Surprise. History is a study of change, ironically used as a map of future. Stanford professor Scott Sagan once said, something everyone who follows the economy or investment market should hang on their wall. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. History is mostly the study of surprising events, but it is often used by investor economists as an unsatiable guide to the future. Do you see the irony? Do you see the problem? Is it smart to have deep appreciation for economics and investing history? History help us calibrate our expectation, study where people tend to go wrong, and offer a rough guide of what tends to work. But it is not, in any way, a map of future. A trap many investors fall into is what I call historians as a prophet's fallacy. An over-reliance on past data as a signal to future condition in a field where innovation and change are lifeblood of progress. You can't blame investor for doing this. If you view investing as a hard science, history should be the perfect guide to future. Geologists can look at billion years of historical data and form a model of how Earth behaves. So can meteorologists and doctors. Kidney operates same way in 2020 as it did in 1020. But investing is not a hard science. It is a massive group of people making imperfect decisions with limited information about things that will have a massive impact on their well-being, which can make even smart people nervous, greedy, and paranoid. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, once said, imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings. Well, investors have feelings, quite a few of them. That's why it's hard to predict what they'll do next based solely on what they did in past. The cornerstone of economics is that things can change over time because the invisible hand hates anything staying too good or too bad indefinitely. Investor Bill Bonner once described how Mr. Market works. He got a capitalism at work t-shirt on a sledgehammer in his hand. Few things stay the same for very long, which means we can't treat historians as prophets. The most important driver of anything tied to money is the stories people tell themselves and preferences they have for goods and services. Those things don't tend to sit still. They change with culture and generation. They are always changing and always will. The mental trick we play on ourselves here is an over admiration of people who have been there, done that when it comes to money. Experiencing specific event does not necessarily qualify you to know what will happen next. In fact, it rarely does because experience leads to overconfidence more than forecasting ability. So this chapter is titled as Surprise, and here we are going to see a lot of surprise as we read this chapter. The first thing that we've read was about how are we looking at past historical data and how are we forecasting future. So history is full of surprising events. It's often used by investor or economics as a guide to the future. But there's at the same time things that has never happened in past is likely to happen in future. So these 2 points are very contradictory in nature, and it becomes difficult to fathom both of them at same point in time. So history do help us to calibrate our expectations, study where people can go wrong, and offer a guide to what can work in future. But it should not be considered as a map of future. Over reliance on historical data makes historian as a prophets, and this is a biggest fallacy. The underlying reason is that the investing is not a hard science. The way Earth was 1,000 years ago, it's is same way today. The weather department also can rely on historical data to forecast. Even the way human body operates is also same. The way it was operating in 1020, it is the same way it is operating in 2020. The hand did not stop functioning, the leg did not say I would not work. Eyes did not say I would not see, I would want to hear. The roles and functionalities are all same as long as we knew the human being existed. But when it comes to investing, investing is not a hard science. What makes it so? Because investing includes people who have emotions. So the things may or may not be same as it was in previous era. And this makes economics and business very lively, which means it keeps on changing each period of time, keeps on upgrading, brings in new dimension of how things are working. And that is most important thing when it comes to money, because whether you've made money, you lost money, whether you got your salary or you got a big increment, you got promotion or you lost money, each and all of the transaction with money has a story behind it. And we need money because that is what is needed for us to get goods and service to meet our day-to-day life. And what happens when there's a presence of money and emotion is that our mind tends to make stories. Sometimes we tend to over admire people who are very successful and rich, and this may lead to overconfidence. Sometimes we do not appreciate people who made a wrong financial decision and we do not like them. Because once you made a right decision in investing, that really does not mean that you will always make the right decision. There's high likelihood that the decision making ability may not stay consistent over your investing journey. So overconfidence in forecasting may even make you in a stage where you are an historian who has seen past cycles and you are now acting as a prophet of forecasting what will happen in future. Investor Michael Betnick once explained this well. Confronted with argument that few investors are prepared for rising interest rate because they've never experienced them. The last big period of rising interest rate almost occurred 40 years ago. He argued that it did not matter because experiencing or even studying what happened in past might not serve as a guide to what will happen when rates rise in future. So what? Will the current rate hike look like the last one or the one before that? Will different asset classes behave similarly the same or the exact opposite? On one hand, people that have been investing through the events in 1987, 2000, 2008 have experienced a lot of different market. On the other hand, isn't it possible that this experience can lead to overconfidence? Failing to admit you are wrong, anchoring to the previous outcomes. Two dangerous things happen when you rely too heavily on investment history as a guide to what's going to happen next. You are likely to miss outlier event that move the needle most. The most important event in historical data are the big outliers, the record-breaking events. They are what move the needle in the economy and even stock market. The Great Depression, World War II, dot-com burst September 11, the housing crash in mid-2000s. A handful of outlier events play an enormous role because they influence so many unrelated events in their wake. 15 billion people were born in 17th and 15 billion people were born in 19th and 20th century. But try to imagine how different the global economy and the whole world would be if just seven of them never existed. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Gavrilo Phil, Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, and Martin Luther King. I'm not even sure that's the most meaningful list, but almost everything about the world today, from borders to technology to social now, would be different if these seven people hadn't left their mark. Any way to put this is that it's one in billion of the people responsible for the perhaps majority of world's direction over last century. The same goes for projects, innovation, events. Imagine last century without the Great Depression, World War II, the Manhattan Project, vaccine, antibiotic, APRANET, September 11, the fall of Soviet Union. How many projects and events occurred in 20th century? Billions, trillions, you know. But those eight alone impacted the world order upon order of magnitude more than others. Things that make tail event easy to underappreciate is how easy it is to underappreciate how things compound. For example, 9/11 prompted Federal Reserve to cut interest rate, which helped drive the housing bubble, which led to financial crisis, which led to poor job market, which led to tens of millions of to seek college education, which led to 1.6 trillion in students loan with 10.8% default rate. It's not intuitive to link 19 hijackers to current weight of student loan, but what happened in the world is driven by few outlier tail events. The majority of what's happening at any given moment in global economy can be tied back to a handful of past events that were nearly impossible to predict. The most common plot of economic history is the role of surprises. The reason surprises occur is not because of our model are wrong or our intelligence is low. It's because the odds that Adolf Hitler parent argued on an evening 9 months before he was born were the same as them conceiving a child. Technology is hard to predict because Bill Gates may have died from polio if Jonas Salk got Sankey and gave up on his quest to find a vaccine. The reason we could not predict student loan growth is because an airport security guard may have confiscated hijacker's knife on 9/11. That's all. There's a lot to it. So there are a lot of things which impacts our investing decision, and also a lot of things happens at macro level that set the direction in which the world will move. Here we've read about 10 individuals that had greatest impact on the world. Also the 10 events that had impacted majority of the world's population. Lot of times we tend to underappreciate this tail events by saying that those are outlier events and they might not happen in future. Even though these events are not happening in future, there is a repercussion effect happening because of this tail event. One event leads multiple mark on the people, whether they're directly or indirectly impacted by this event. And one of this example, which is beautifully explained, is that 9/11. Just because of 9/11 attack, the Federal Reserve in US was prompted to cut rates to ensure that the economy stays stable and the impact is not massive on economy. But what happened? As the Federal Reserve started cutting rates, it drove housing bubble. and this led to further financial crisis, which led to poor job market, and which also led to millions of children who were seeking college education and had 1.6 trillion in student loan to default. So it's very counterintuitive to link how hijacker could impact students' loan rate, but that is what has happened. And this is again driven by few tail events. 9/11 was one of those tail events, but it has massive impact across the US job market, US economy, and also the default in students' loan rate. That's how the economics play out. We'd say economic history, economic history is full of surprises. And the reason surprises occur is not because our model are wrong or our intelligence is low. Because we don't know about which individual would act which way and what would be the impact on overall economy. The problem is that we often use events like this as a view to events like depression, World War II to guide our view of things like worst case scenario when thinking about future return. But a lot of time what we miss out is that this worst case scenario or tail event or an outlier event has a lot of repercussion impact on a lot of things happening before and after that. The events happening after that may be good or bad event, but those events have wider impact on each individual on this earth. And that's how the history is built upon. So if a forecaster or a historian who is using historical data point to forecast future, and if he takes into consideration one of the event, or if he ignores one of the event, by ignoring one event, you are not taking into consideration the repercussion that it led to the economy. Because had there was no 9/11, then probably there would have been no student loan default. And the economy would have stayed same as it is. Because no 9/11, no federal rate cut, economy going on normal basis, no housing crisis, no job losses, no student loan debt. So it's very difficult to remove one of the outlier event because that has lot of impact on other aspects of life. So let's read further. Nassim Taleb in his book Fooled by Randomness. In Egypt, subscribers tracked the high water mark of Nile and used it as an estimate for future worst case scenario. The same can be seen in the Fukushima nuclear reactor, which experienced a catastrophic failure in 2011 when a tsunami was struck. It has been built to withstand the worst past historical earthquake, with builders not imagining much worst and not thinking that the past worst event had to be surprise as it has no precedent. This is not a failure of analysis, it's a failure of imagination. Realizing the future might not look anything like the past is a special kind of skill that is not generally looked highly upon by a financial forecasting community. In 2017 dinner I attended in New York, Daniel Kahneman was asked how investors should respond when forecasts are wrong. He said, whenever we are surprised by something, even if we admit that we made a mistake, we would say, oh, we never made that mistake again. Oh, I will never make that mistake again. But in fact, what you should learn when you make a mistake, because you did not anticipate something in that world is difficult to anticipate. The correct lesson to learn from surprises, the world is surprising. The correct lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising. Not that we should use past surprises as a guide to future boundaries, that we should use past surprises as an admission that we have no idea that what might happen next. The most important economic events of the future, things that will move the needle the most, are the things that history gives us little to no guide about. They will be unprecedented events. Their unprecedented nature means we won't be prepared for them, which is part of what makes them so impactful. This is true for both scary events like recession and war and great events like innovation. I'm confident in that prediction because surprises moving the needle the most is one focus that's been accurate at virtually every point in history. So Daniel Kahneman, who is the renowned author, and he's written another interesting book, Think Fast and Think Slow. So when he met Mr. Morgan at a dinner, and that time he was asked, what would he do when his forecasts are wrong? He would say whenever he's surprised by something, even if it admit that he made a mistake, he would say, "Oh well, I'll never make that mistake again." But probably that is not the way of looking at mistake. What you should learn when you make a mistake because you did not anticipate something that the world is difficult to anticipate. That's the learning that needs to be derived from mistake. That if you're making any mistake, that is because you did not anticipate something that world is difficult to anticipate. The correct lesson to take from any mistake is, or any surprise is, the world is surprising, which means there will always be some or other thing that you would not be in position to anticipate. And your inability to anticipate things would lead to surprises, which may or may not be easy for you to handle them. The most important economic events of future, things that will move the needle most, are the things that history gave us little or no guide about. So even in past, when this outlier event happened, there were very few indicators saying that these events are about to happen. So Mr. Morgan is saying that since in past, when this event happened, there were very few indicators to give us an indication, okay, this event is coming, protect yourself. The same thing is likely to happen in future. In future also, stock market will come with lot of surprises, lot of uncertain things, and even that point in time, we might not know that what is being currently ongoing. So be ready for all the surprises that world is going to offer because that is how you build your decision making muscle. Now, point two. History can be misleading guide to future of the economy and stock market because it does not account for structural changes that are relevant in today's world. Consider a few big ones. The 401k is 42 years old. The Roth IRA is younger, created in 1990s. So personal finance advice and analysis about how Americans save for retirement today is not directly comparable to what made sense just a century ago, generation ago. We have few options. Things change. Or take venture capital. It barely existed 25 years ago. There were single venture capital fund today that are larger that entire industry that was a generation ago. In his memoirs, Nike founder Phil Knight wrote about his early days in business. There were no such thing as venture capital. An aspiring young entrepreneur had a very few places to turn, and those places were all guarded by risk-averse gatekeeper with zero imagination. In other words, banker. What this means, in effect, is that all historical data going back just a few decades about how startups are financed is out of date. What we know about investment cycle and startup failure rate is not a deep base of history to learn from because the way companies are funded today is such a new historical paradigm. Or take public market. The S&P 500 did not include financial stock until 1976. Today, financials make up to 16% of the index. Technology stocks were virtually non-existent 50 years ago. Today, they are more than fifth of the index. Accounting rules have changed over time, so have disclosure, auditing, and amount of market liquidity. Things change. The time between US recession has changed dramatically over last 150 years. The average time between recession has grown from about 2 years in late 1800s to 5 years in 2000 to 8 years in last half century. As I write this book, we are going into depression 12 years since the last recession began in December 2007. That's the longest gap between recessions since Civil War. There are plenty of theories on why recession has become less frequent. One is Fed is better at managing the business cycle or at least extending it. Another is heavy industry is more prone to boom and bust overproduction than service industries that are dominated last 50 years. The pessimistic view is that we now have fewer recession, but when they occur, they are more powerful than before. For our argument, it does not particularly matter what caused change. What matters is that things clearly change. So again, continuing the role of surprises. The point two says history can be a misleading guide to future of stock economy and stock market because there has been a lot of structural changes that happen today. Whether it is about the way people save for retirement or the presence of venture capital fund. All of this were non-existent just a generation ago. Nike founder, he says that when he was starting out, aspiring young entrepreneur, the only individual who would lend money were high risk averse bankers. There was no venture capital who was willing to take that risk. This indicates that all the historical data that we have currently is outdated because there have been a lot of structural changes that has happened, the way people look at it. And this makes it very difficult for us to rely on historical data point to forecast what will happen in future. Another point that we discussed is S&P 500. It did not include any financial services till 1976, but as good as 2020, it has almost 16. Financials make up to 16% of the index. Technology stocks were non-existent 50 years ago, but today technology stocks have been a multi-bagger. So a lot of things have changed, and without having a precedent of those factors, the structural change, the history does not support us. It's very difficult to make any sense of historical data in forecasting future, which does not take into consideration current realities. Another interesting data point that we saw that previously that gap between two recession was about 2 years. But now that recession time gap has increased to like 8 years and sometimes even longer period. We've not seen that worst Great Depression. And for that, there are two reasons. One, maybe the Federal Reserve or the Reserve Bank of different countries have become very efficient in managing business or managing the monetary cycle and its repercussions. And second, the heavy proportion of heavy industries is comparatively gone down. There's a lot of service and technology companies in the index, which tend to have lower impact and they tend to recover much faster. So it there would be 100 other reasons, but what matters is that the things have changed materially. Now, let's see how these all historical events have affected our investing journey. To show how these historical changes would affect investing decision, consider the work of man many believes to be one of the greatest investment mind of all time, Benjamin Graham. Benjamin Graham's classic book, The Intelligent Investor, is more than a theory. It gives practical direction like formulas investor can use to make smart investing decisions. I read Graham book when I was teenager, learning about investing for the first time. The formula presented in the book were appealing to me because they were literally step-by-step instruction on how to get rich. Just follow the instruction, it seems easy. But something becomes clear when you try applying some of these formulas. Few of them actually work. Graham advocated purchasing stock trading for less than the networking assets, basically cash in bank minus all debts. This sounds great, but few stock actually trade that cheaply anymore. other than, say, a penny stock accused of accounting fraud. One of the Graham's criteria instructs conservative investors to avoid stock trading at more than 1.5 times book value. If you followed this rule over last decade, you would have owned almost nothing but an insurance and a bank stock. There is no world where that is okay. The Intelligent Investor is one of the greatest investing book of all time, but I don't know a single investor who has done well implementing Graham's published formula. The book is full of wisdom, perhaps more than any other investment book ever published. But a how-to guide, it's questionable at best. What happened? Was Graham a showman who sounded good but whose advice did not work? Not at all. He was wildly successful investor himself. But he was practical and he was true contrarian. He wasn't so wedded to investing ideas that did stick with them when too many other investors caught on to those theories, making them so popular as to render their potential useless. Jason Wing, who noted a later version of Graham's book, once wrote, Graham was constantly experimenting and retesting his assumption and seeking out what works, not what worked yesterday, but what works today. In each revised edition, the intelligent investor Graham discarded the formula he presented in previous edition and replaced them with the new ones, declaring in a sense that those do not work anymore or they do not work as well as they used to. These are the formulas that seem to work better now. One of the common criticism made of Graham is that all the formulas in 1972 edition are antiquated. The only proper response to this criticism is to say, of course they are. They were once used to replace the formulas in 1965 edition, which replaced the formula in 1954 edition, which in turn replaced the ones in 1949 edition, which were used to augment the original formulas that they presented in security analysis in 1934. Graham died in 1976. If the formula he advocated were discarded and updated 5 times between 34 to 72, how relevant do you think they are in 2020 or will be in 2050? Just before he died, Graham was asked whether detailed analysis of individual stocks, a tactic he became famous for, remains strategy he favored. He answered, in general, no. I am no longer an advocate of elaborate technique of security analysis in order to find superior value opportunities. This was a rewarding activity 40 years ago when our textbooks were first published, but the situation has changed a great deal since then. What changed was competition grew as opportunities became well known. Technology made information more accessible and industry changed as economy shifted from industrial to technology sector, which have different business cycle and capital uses. Things change. An interestingly quick of investing history is that further back you look, the more likely you are to be examining a world that no longer applies to today. Many investors and economists take comfort in knowing their forecasts are backed up by decades, even centuries of data. But since economies evolve, recent history is often the best guide to future because it's more likely to include important conditions that are relevant to the future. So, Intelligent Investor is one of the most it's one of the most recommended books. Anybody who is starting out in the finance field and starting out as an investing in the investing journey as a stock market investor, whether it's related to the job that they have or whether it is related to the individual investment that they are planning to do, whether it is managing PMS. Intelligent Investor book is always recommended. It was recommended to me also. And I've also seen a lot of my young colleagues were recommended this book when they were starting out. And this book is considered as a Bible, not because of all the theories that he had, but it is simple, implementable guide on on step by step, how to invest in stock market. The book was originally published in 1932, and then it got revised 5 times between 1934 and 1972. And in each of those additions, Graham discarded few formulas and replaced them with others, saying that the old formula does not work, these new ones are the ones which are working. The edition that we have today is 1972 edition that is always referred to. A lot of formulas in this 1972 editions are not currently implementable. What is the reason? Because lot of things have changed since that point in time. The formulas that is saying that price to book value should be less than 1.5, or working capital should be this, debt should be this, current ratio should be this. Today, you would not find any company who would fall in this category, which would make which will help you to make a good investment decision. The only reason why it's difficult because the book did not see an upgrade from 72 to today. Even during his last few days, when Graham was asked, he said that it needs to get upgraded for things that are happening in the economy, for the dynamic that are changing in the world at every point in time. So, since economies evolved, the recent history may or may not help you to make good decision about future. We will have to take into consideration what is the current practicality ongoing for you to decide. Because just sticking to an old edition of book which is not upgraded, you might not find a many good investing opportunity. It's good to have a conceptual clarity to know how to evaluate what factors to take into consideration for evaluation. The formulas may be correct, but the parameter that is given in for testing those formulas may not always stand to the test of time. There's a common phrase in investing, usually used mockingly. It's different this time. If you need to rebut someone who's predicting future, won't perfectly mirror the past, say, oh, you think it's different this time? Drop the mic. It comes from investor John Templeton's view that the four dangerous words in investing are it's different this time. Templeton thought admitted that it is different at least 20% of the time. The world changes. Of course it does. And those changes are what matters most over time. Michael Benpick put it, the 12 most dangerous words in investing are, the four most dangerous words in investing are, it's different this time. That does not mean we should ignore history when thinking about money. But here's an important nuances. The further back in history you look, the more general your takeaways should be. General things like people's relationship to greed and fear, how they behave under stress and how they respond to incentives tend to be stable in time. The history of money is useful for that kind of stuff. But specific trends, specific trades, specific sector, specific casual relationship about market and what people should do with their money are always example of evaluation in progress. Historians are not prophets. The next question then is, how should we think about and plan for future? That's for next chapter, but for now, the most dangerous words are it's different this time. Because though history is repeating itself, the event in past brought in some surprises are likely to bring more surprises in future. So even in case of hard science, where we saw two examples where the bridge was built, taking into consideration the worst case scenario that was experienced before respect to flooding and all. But next time the Mother Earth breach those previous highs and previous worst case scenario to demonstrate that the new worst is further worse than the previous worst. So it's always better to be prepared for surprises, to anticipate that there is likelihood that some surprises may come up in future, to take into consideration all of this and evaluate more recent past instead of going back few decades ago because those principles may not be relevant today because there have been a lot of structural changes that is happening in economy in current period, which makes it very difficult for us to derive past data point into future, extrapolate past into future, thereby making it difficult in forecasting future. So see what are the recent history. Look at the dynamics, what drives fear and greed in an individual. Because this is the most important factor that drives stock market. Once you know what are the people's relationship with greed, fear, stress, incentive, it will become much more comfortable to forecast something that is likely to come and something that would lead to a stable prediction. Because anything, whether it's trend, trades, sectors, economies, relationship with market, all of these things are continuously changing. The factors are very dynamic. And that is why we cannot take any historians as prophets. We just have to take historical data as a pinch of salt to evaluate how did human psychology reacted in past surprises and how is it likely to react in future to decide our plan of investment. So, guys, it was very interesting reading this chapter. In fact, I went a lot deeper in my thoughts when thinking about surprises. I would really like to know from you, when in your life did you had few surprise events you had not anticipated, you did not forecast, and it just felt like it came to break you down? Let me know in comment section. What drives this behavior and how did you handle it? I'm looking forward to your comments. I read each of them and I really feel cherished when I read those comments to know how much impact each of this chapter is having on each of you. Thank you so much. See you in next session.